I'm Cassie Lancellotti-Young, VP of Client Analytics and Optimization at Sailthru, and thank you all so much for joining us today for this conversation on leveraging retention to optimize customer acquisition. By way of background, I run our analytics and optimization team at Sailthru, which is tasked with working with our portfolio brands to make sure they're using our platform in the most compelling way possible. As you may or may not know, Sailthru provides a host of marketing automation and personalization tools for B2C brands, and we're going to talk to you a little bit more about some of the compelling ways we've been able to improve customer retention for these brands accordingly. On the flip side, I work closely with our portfolio brands to act as the voice of the customer and make sure that we are ever evolving the Sailthru platform to meet the needs of today's multi-channel marketer. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started. One thing that I'll note quickly is that we are going to hold all questions for the end, but if you think of a question while we are working through the sequence of slides here, you can go ahead and submit that question directly to the host via the chat functionality in the WebEx, and we'll be sure to address that closer to the end of the hour. So just looking at today's agenda quickly, we're going to start the discussion by talking quickly about how exactly does one go about calculating and predicting the true cost of customer acquisition. From there, we're going to dig a little bit deeper into the customer lifecycle and talk about 5 key buckets. The first is, not surprisingly, customer acquisition and acquiring email addresses. The second is activating new users. And what we mean by activating new users is to get them to complete some valuable behavior for the first time. It could be a purchase, it could be a blog post, etc. From there, we'll talk about protecting downstream retention. A huge challenge that we see with many of our clients to date is that they're able to activate people for the first time, but they're not able to retain those people, post day 30 or 60 or 90. And we'll talk about some common ways to avoid that trap. The fourth thing that we'll talk about is instigating referral, or in other words, driving a viral coefficient for your business. And the final thing will be on various tools that you can use to drive incremental revenue above and beyond these first 4 buckets. And again, we'll wrap up today's sessions by answering some of the questions from the audience. So the first question we're going to seek to answer today is, what is the true cost of customer acquisition? So most of those on the line probably know that the fundamental rule of direct response marketing pertains to customer unit economics, which basically comes down to one formula. And that formula is that the lifetime value of a customer, or the total projected cash flows you expect to have from that customer over their lifetime, whatever period of time that may be, needs to be substantially greater than how much it costs you to acquire that customer so that you stand to make some profit. Oftentimes, lifetime value is called CLV or LTV. Customer acquisition cost is often called a CAC or a CPA, a cost per acquisition. We'll use those acronyms throughout what we're talking about now. One quick note on this equation is that a lot of marketers will look at lifetime value only on a 1-year time horizon for the purpose of marketing mix optimization, so that they make sure that they have a 1-year payback period and how quickly they earn money back from the customers they acquire. Different businesses have different ways of examining this horizon. A business like a Starbucks might actually look at a 15-year time horizon, so you need to kind of look at what's happening in your competitive set and make a judgment call from there. The key to understanding customer acquisition costs is the understanding that there are ultimately 2 different customer acquisition costs. In the first example, let's look at the cost of acquiring an email address. A marketer spends $1,000 on an advertising campaign yesterday and gets 100 signups from that. Basic math would say, well, the CPA, or cost per acquisition, for that campaign was $10, the $1,000 divided by the 100 signups. In reality, however, we have no idea how many of those 100 signups are ultimately going to go on to make a purchase or to be engaged consumers. So that $10 is really what I would call a CPAR, or a cost per acquired registrant. You could call it per acquired lead or email or whatever other nomenclature you're most comfortable with. So what is the other CPA then? The next CPA is the true cost of customer acquisition, which looks at the same example that we looked at from yesterday. A marketer spends $1,000 on an ad and gets 100 signups, but only 10 of those signups ultimately go on to buy something. So really, the new equation becomes the $1,000 ad spend divided by the 10 buyers, which is a $100 CPA, or as I call it, a CPAC, a cost per acquired customer, someone who actually generates money for the business. So as you can see, there's an inherent challenge to what we're looking at here. Let's say for this hypothetical business, the lifetime value of a customer was $75. If we optimize off of metric number 1 incorrectly, we would think that we were operating kind of in the black on what was happening. It cost us $10 to acquire someone, and we're making $75 off of them. In reality, however, it costs us $100 to acquire the actual paying customer who only generates $75 in lifetime value, meaning that this is actually an unprofitable media buy or marketing campaign. So for this reason, it is super important when you are thinking about actually understanding what the true cost of customer acquisition is, that you are focused on what the downstream mechanics might be. Now, an important question here might be, what if your product is free and you actually don't make revenue from the customers that you have in your ecosystem? That's not a problem. There's kind of two ways that you can think about this type of instance. The first is what I would call monetization potential. In other words, how much is each user worth in terms of their ultimate revenue potential? If you think about a business that makes their money through advertising, you might think about what's the average number of monthly page views a user has, and what does that correlate to in terms of overall advertising dollars that you might earn from them? This allows you to ultimately assign a lifetime value metric to an end user where there actually is no transaction between you and the end user. The second is thinking about engagement as a proxy. So if you're not operating off of advertising, or you're not driving money directly from the customer, what other behaviors are valuable? So think about the example of Twitter before they got into the business of sponsored posts and so on and so forth. They would measure engagement by, was someone actively tweeting? Were they actually following? Because they knew that these were metrics that drove stronger health into the overarching ecosystem. And again, this is a valuable customer. So for these types of businesses, you'd think more about what is the tipping point for user engagement. So going further on the Twitter example, we have a little pop quiz here where this is a sample email that I'll receive from them. They're obviously not focused on opens or clicks or even purchases. They're focused on driving incremental follows to me. They're recommending more people for me to follow so that I am more engaged and spend more time in the platform. When we think about business analytics in general, we believe that the calculation of core metrics and core business mechanics is very much a science, but oftentimes figuring out the metrics that you need to look at is something of an art, so just something to keep in mind. An important question is, well, going back to the example of the $1,000 ad spend that drove 100 signups, how do we possibly know today how many of those 100 signups will ultimately buy something in the future? And the answer to that question is something called the customer intake curve. The customer intake curve is something that you develop based on historical data and that you tweak and further iterate on over time so that it's always accurate based on your most recent 6 months or 12 months of data. And what it does is it breaks down all of the buyers or engagers, if you're not actually driving purchases, that you've ever had come through your business and when they've purchased for the first time. So if we look at the example chart on this slide, we see that anyone who's ever become a buyer has become a buyer within 6 months or 180 days. Of all of the people who've ever purchased something from us, we know that 52% of those people bought for the first time the first day that they were an email subscriber with our brand. So what is the significance of this? Well, this lets us project out what our ultimate cost of customer acquisition may look like. And how does this work? Well, let's say, again, that yesterday we spent $1,000 on Google and we had 100 signups. So, again, we had that CPAR of $10. I don't know precisely how many of those 100 people are going to purchase something in the future, but I do know how many of them purchased something yesterday or on day one, and that was the 6, or yesterday's day one Google purchasers. I also know that from this customer intake curve, that 6 represents only 52% of the total buyers that I ultimately expect to get out of this cohort of users. So what that lets me do is it lets me say, well, 6 is only 52% of the total expected buyers, so I expect 11 purchasers from this cohort over their lifetime. So my forecasted cost per acquisition of a customer is the $1,000 divided by the 11, or $90.91. As you see, again, the $90 CPAR is very, very different from the $90 CPAC that we're talking about. It's for this reason that we really feel that focusing on retention is absolutely paramount to optimizing your customer acquisition costs. Why is this the case? The more of your customers that you can get to buy, inevitably, the lower that true downstream cost of customer acquisition becomes. Sailthru snapshot reports give you a lot of downstream insights into what happens for typical groups of cohorts from various sign-up date ranges, from acquisition sources, so on and so forth. And in this example, you can see that I'm looking at a group of users who came from a Google AdWords ad 421 in the month of October 2012 to see exactly the lifetime value breakdown of those different, of all of the users who fell within that average, within that particular cohort. You'll see that I know that the average email address is worth $24.65, with the average purchaser being worth $147.36. Again, this is the difference between a cost per acquired reader, the average user, and cost per acquired customer, the average purchaser. So now that we understand a little bit more about how to actually calculate out those customer acquisition costs, we're going to dig a little bit deeper into dissecting the customer life cycle. And to do that, I'm going to borrow a page out of the book of David McClure, who's an esteemed angel investor out in the Silicon Valley. Dave McClure was previously the director of marketing for PayPal and came up with a helpful framework of metrics that he calls pirate metrics. If you look at what the first letter of each word spells out, it's intuitive as to why, into how to think about breaking down the marketing funnel. And those are acquisition, activation, retention, referral, and revenue. And interestingly, McClure actually devised these metrics to focus on startups, but what we found is they actually apply very, very strongly to businesses of all shapes and sizes. So without further ado, let's talk about acquiring email addresses. We're just going to run briefly past this one so that we can focus the bulk of our time on thinking about core customer retention mechanics. So the main takeaway here is that you want to make a concerted effort to capture a user's email address before the first purchase. And what I mean by this is oftentimes when you look at a commerce business, there are two ways where you can particulate how businesses acquire an email address. The first is by having some kind of prompt or call to action on the website that says, subscribe to our newsletter or emails to get special offers or sales, so on and so forth. The second is to let the person browse the site completely anonymously and then give them a prompt for an email address only when they go to make a purchase for the first time. Inevitably, it's much more valuable to have that email address before the first purchase because you can put forth push messaging to make sure that that first purchase comes that much sooner. You also have more control in sort of educating the end user about your brand, so on and so forth. So, easier said than done. How do you actually get people to give you the email addresses? A couple of tips that we've seen work well for our clients. The first one is thinking about offering incentives. This is pretty intuitive, telling people that they need to sign up to receive special sales and offers, so on and so forth. The second one is that a lot of commerce brands in particular drive a number of people to their Facebook fan page and have a pretty compelling fan base. It's super important that you have an easy sign-up option for your email list from your social media outlets, primarily because there's a lot more value that's taken from moving from social to email than vice versa, from email to social in terms of conversion and transaction value. The second thing to think about is we know that you may not want to put a sign-up wall in front of a user as soon as they come to the site because it may detract from the overarching user experience, but it's perfectly acceptable to present some kind of sign-up overlay that the user can easily click out of after X number of page views. That might be 2, 3, whatever you deem relevant. Once you know that the user has been interesting enough to stick around for a little while, but you really want to get that email address so that you have the remarketing capability moving forward. The final way to get an email address in a straightforward way is through mobile apps. You'll notice that the vast majority of mobile apps that you'll download through the App Store, if you're not an existing user, they'll ask you to set up an account pretty immediately after you do the download. So now let's move into, we have the email addresses. How do we activate new users or get them to buy or engage for the first time? So the first thing to realize is that there's two primary avenues for activation. One focuses on pull and the other on push. When we think about pull really pertains to product, app, or website flows that educate the user. The most common practice of this would be a tour. So you sign up for a new website, you come in, the screen is kind of blacked out in the background, and you get a 2 to 5 screen welcome tour of how exactly to use the product. The next thing is push. So this could be messaging of any kind. It could be email, it could be push notifications, it could be remarketing banners that are designed to get the user to take their first action. We're going to go through some examples of both. Thinking about pull, this is an example from OkCupid where it is super important for them, it's an online dating website, to make sure that they get complete profiles, because complete profiles are the lifeblood to their customer ecosystem. So accordingly, when someone signs up for the first time, they're prompted to upload a photo, tell a little bit about themselves, so on and so forth. This onboarding flow changes based on what the user has input, and we'll ask them for the most pertinent details accordingly. Looking into some push tactics, let's talk a little bit about welcome series. So welcome series are often called onboarding series or activation series, are email campaigns or a series of email campaigns that brands use to introduce new customers to their product for the first time. So I'm going to take you through the welcome series of a company called Rent the Runway, which is a renting marketplace for upscale dresses. So let's look at Rent the Runway's day one email here. The day one email is super clear. The call to action is to go to the site and to start browsing immediately. One thing we don't love about this email is how they offer a discount immediately up front without giving the user a chance to pay full price first. We'll chat a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But in general, this is a strong welcome email that reiterates what the website does and getting people to come back to the site to get started pretty immediately. What they do on day two is they actually highlight their most popular inventory. This is a strategy that we see work really well. For in the example of Rent the Runway, they'll change this email up based on season. So what you're seeing right now is for the summer and a host of other attributes as well. Again, not crazy about the incentive, but we'll talk more about why that is in a few minutes. On day four, they talk a little bit more about how it works. So the logic here is at day four, if the user has still not submitted for their first dress rental, we want to tell them a little bit more about how it works, and we're going to do that by addressing some frequently asked questions. So you'll see they had some big ones around, well, what if the dress doesn't fit? They get that right in here, so on and so forth. If the user still has not rented on day seven, they introduce this element of what they call a personal stylist. The personal stylist is there to give people one-to-one advice around what they may want to rent or how something fits, so on and so forth. It's very similar to the live chat functionality that you may see on a lot of other commerce websites. One thing to note is that these personal touch techniques tend to work very, very well. You just want to make sure that they're on brand with whatever it is that you might be doing and believable to some degree so that you don't completely erode credibility around what you're doing. On day 17, they then go through and offer a reminder of that $25 offer they presented on day two. This is actually the identical email to what they ran on day two, just a reminder 2 weeks later around the fact that that offer is about to expire. Going back into the welcome email that we looked at before, so that's the one on the left. Rent the Runway's previous welcome email is on the right. You'll see the challenge of this welcome email on the right is that there are too many calls to action. They're competing for attention from one another, and the user isn't sure precisely what they're supposed to do. Are they supposed to like on Facebook? Should they start browsing? Should they reach into the stylist, et cetera, et cetera? It's super important to debunk out those super important call to actions into different separate and unique messages. Beyond email, remarketing is becoming another popular push channel, especially with the advent of Facebook custom audience tools, Google's remarketing pixels, so on and so forth. These banners you should all be very intimately familiar with what they are. It's inevitably when you look at a lamp on Pottery Barn and that lamp follows you around the internet for seemingly till the end of time or until you buy it. Some examples here. So literally yesterday, went on Nordstrom, looked at rainbow sandals. Within a matter of minutes, this sponsored ad was popped up in my Facebook news feed. Similarly, Amazon will do things with, product browse abandonment, so on and so forth. This is a great way. One thing to remember is that the average open rate for any given email is typically only about 20 to 25%. So the remarketing opportunity gives you an awesome chance to address that other 75 to 80% of the audience who you may not be able to get your message back in front of. So going back to the point that I made about discounts, you always need to be very, very careful and strategic with discounts because you don't want to erode customer willingness to pay. I like to say that online discounts work a lot like offline discounts in that if yogurt is always on sale at the grocery store, you're never going to be willing to pay full price for yogurt at the grocery store because you know there's always going to be some kind of offer on it. On this slide, I show an example of a sample subscription company and a look at what the first month payment price actually does to impact the monthly renewal rate. So let's pretend for a second that this is an online dating website where the full price is $40 a month. When the cohort of users who pay $40 a month go to renew for a second month, 70% of them will ultimately renew. When the brand offers 10% off or a payment of $36 a month, the monthly renewal rate is still 70%, so there's really not any problem with offering that 10% discount if it will help activate people for the first time. However, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom and focus on the free trial bucket, or people who pay nothing for that first month, the monthly renewal rate drops down to 40%. For that reason, even though free trial seems really exciting in terms of converting users and getting them to try for the first time, it can be absolutely devastating to the company's bottom line in terms of completely eroding customer willingness to pay, renewal rate, and driving churn through the roof. Similar dynamics take place with ad hoc commerce, where if people always buy a product on promotion, they're not going to be inclined to buy it full price. J.Crew is my personal favorite example of this from a commerce perspective, where it feels as though people are really only receiving emails to get those sales discount, and the joke is you just don't buy anything there at full price. So next, with regards to activation, I'd encourage people to think about what's often called magic numbers. And magic numbers are basically what is the tipping point until you define a user as being truly engaged in your product. So for example, Facebook knows that a user is going to be sticky for them in terms of frequency of use when they've achieved 7 friends in the first 10 days that they're a member on Facebook. It's probably been a while since people on the webinar have registered for Facebook, but if you go through and set up a dummy account, you'll notice that their pull or their onboarding flow on site is to get people to state where they went to school, where they work, so on and so forth, so that Facebook can easily recommend people they know so that they can add friends and hit that 7 friend mark that much sooner. LinkedIn does something very similar. Relatedly, Zynga, the game company, is focused on what they call D1 metrics, or day plus 1. And what that means is it's really interesting for them to see how many people download any given game, but what defines a sticky user is how many people come back the day after they download the game, because there's a lot of drive-by people who may hear about Farmville and go and check it out, but ultimately never come back. So there's a lot of kind of statistical regressions and that type of thing that you can run to determine what is that ultimate tipping point, and then put together the correct marketing campaigns in an automated fashion to help you get there. The one thing I want to note about customer activation is to make sure that you're monitoring the metrics that actually matter, or what we'll call an apples-to-apples measurement. So for instance, if I look at this chart here, what it's basically showing me is all of these groups along the x-axis here are cohorts of users based on when they joined. So this first one is all the people who subscribed in August 2010. The top of the bar is telling me of all the people who subscribed in August 2010, how many of them have purchased to date. So about 23% of them have purchased. All of these bars in between are breaking the calculation down into how many people purchased within the first 30 days, the first 60 days, 90 days, so on and so forth. So for the August 2010 cohort, 23% have purchased, only about 3% of them purchased in that first 30 days. What am I talking about with regards to the apples-to-apples measurement? Well, inherently, it would not be fair to compare the activation rate for people who subscribed in August 2010, the 23%, to people who subscribed in June 2011, or the 10%. And the reason for this is because the people who subscribed in August 2010 have had substantially more time to be indoctrinated by the brand through the various marketing messages that you're putting in front of them, the various sales that you've had there, new inventory that's come through, so on and so forth. So instead, you need to find a metric that compares these cohorts on an apples-to-apples basis, which, for the sake of this example, we'll call activation within the first 30 days. So what this the first turquoise bar is doing is it's showing, again, how many people buy for the first time within 30 days. And when I look at just that turquoise bar over time, I'm seeing that it steadily increases for a while. And so what that tells me is that this brand got substantially better at getting people to buy in the first 30 days, probably because they tweaked their onboarding, whether it was the push or pull tactic, whatever it might be. Why is that important? It's important because all of the academic research out there will tell you that, and it's just pretty intuitive, the faster that you get someone to buy for the first time, the higher their customer lifetime value is going to be, because the more you accelerate all of their future purchases and so on and so forth. So again, when you're looking at metrics, just make sure that you're looking at things on a level playing field. The other thing to think about with activation is not to forget about the basic forces of supply and demand. So I want to talk about an example of one of our clients, which is Sailthru, which is the restaurant arm of Groupon. By way of background, prior to joining the team at Sailthru, I ran marketing at Sailthru for 2 years. Looking at this example, we're looking at 2 different markets that Sailthru operates in. The first, New York City, and the second is Denver. In New York City, you can see that the user comes in and sees an option to book at 379 different restaurants. In Denver, there's only 13 different restaurants. Inevitably, it would be unfair to look at the day one activation rate for someone who has 379 restaurants to pick from and compare it to someone who has only 13, because that element of customer choice is severely dwindled in the second example. So again, you want to make sure that you're putting your best foot forward with your merchandising and your inventory in order to really kind of drive that propensity to activate home. Same thing goes for commerce brands. If you're only releasing new products every so often, that's going to be very different from a flash sale model where there's new stuff that's coming in every single day. So again, looking further at the Savored example, this is actually a chart where we mapped out on the right hand axis, we're looking at the number of restaurants a user saw on their first day in the product. And on the left hand axis, we're looking at what was the propensity to have a transaction on the first day. And as you'll see, the more restaurants that were put on there, the higher that propensity became. So again, you need to think about what is the overarching business ecosystem that the customer sees when you're thinking about customer activation. So now we've gotten the user to activate for the first time. Now we need to know how do we keep them coming back over time and protect our downstream retention. I alluded to this earlier, but oftentimes what we see is that after day 30, customers see a marked decline in the likelihood that a customer that their individual customers continue to remain engaged over time, whether that be engagement through an email open, through a website visit, through a purchase, so on and so forth. Before we do that, I'm going to make a quick PSA, which is for no data silos. And what I mean by no data silos is that with the big advent of big data have arrived very big data silos. So oftentimes people have one vendor for tracking their site analytics, one for email, one for the app analytics, one for customer service, one for live chat. I could go on and on and on. You need to bring all of those disparate data points under one roof in order to build a 360-degree profile of a user, and this is exactly what we're in the business of doing at Sailthru. So this screen grab here is what's called our user lookup, where you can see if I were to decompose any of the sections that were in here, I can understand more about what my specific device usage is, my interests based on meta tags that live on the website, so on and so forth. The reason why you need to avoid these silos is because data silos lead to highly ineffective marketing. So to review this example I provided from American Express quickly, this was an email I got from them a few months ago encouraging me to check out the updated mobile app. I've been an American Express user for probably about 10 years, and I've had the iPhone app for at least the last 1 or 2. Still, when I receive this email, they're giving me prompts to go to both the App Store and Google Play, despite the fact I've never had any interaction with American Express on an Android platform. This is the distraction right off the top. Further, when I jump in, I read a little bit more about the newest app, got excited, went to the App Store, and sought to download it. There were no options to upgrade the American Express app in the App Store because I had already done that. If American Express had been tying together these different pieces of data from the various silos, they would have precluded me from receiving this email and only sent it to the people who had not yet downloaded this latest version of the app. So along those lines, it's important to recognize that batch and blast no longer cuts it in marketing. ReturnPath recently released this report where they talked about how the inbox is a battlefield for customer attention. It's so true. If you think about 5 years ago, the number of emails that would live in your inbox at 7 a.m., it might be 5 or 6. I think this morning when I woke up, I probably had about 45 various promotional emails that are there. I'm inevitably not going to open all of them. So the first point that brings up is, one, the subject line is more critical than ever because a lot of times it enables you to not have to kind of bury the lead for the message you're putting in front of the user. And two, the reality is that a lot of customers are communicating with brands solely through the subject line. I may not have opened an email from Groupon in the last 60 days, but I could probably tell you that last week they ran a Mediterranean dinner for 2 on the Upper East Side for $69. Similarly, when a user does click into the email, it's imperative that all of the content that's there is hyper relevant to them because they're not going to stick around and dig for something that's pertinent. It needs to kind of hit them over the head. So in this example from Google Offers, I got an offer for BJ's Wholesale Club. I live in Manhattan, and I have no idea where the closest BJ's Wholesale Club would be. So again, they're using this top hero image on something that's absolutely not relevant to where I live or what I seek to do. So personalization is really the business that Sailthru is in. What we do is we use those 360-degree profiles of the user that we build to then automatically deploy various sets of content to people based on what's going to be most interested to each individual end user. So in the case of this particular slide and Business Insider, who's one of our publishing clients, we'll see that user A and user B may receive very, very different emails just based on their browsing history over time. If we were looking at a commerce example, we would know if someone is more likely to purchase apparel versus accessories and personalize the content of their email accordingly. Why is personalization important? It's important because it results in improved engagement. So we know on the media side of our client base that brands who've deployed personalization oftentimes see as much as a 3x lift in time on site and the number of page views per session. And on the commerce side, we oftentimes see clients with anywhere from a 5 to 10% lift in average order value just by showcasing personalized recommendations based on the user's interest and what they've purchased in the past. One thing to remember with personalization is that timeliness is an important part of relevance. One of our core product features at Sailthru is something called personalized send time. And what personalized send time does is it looks at these types of charts that are showcased on the bottom right here to see when each individual end user is most likely to engage with email, mobile, and then also on-site activities so that we can make sure we deploy emails to each user when they're most likely to engage and transact. So what that means is instead of a brand deploying all of their emails to the whole audience at 9 a.m., they might say, I want to deploy my email sometime between 9 a.m. and 9 p.m., but I want you to deploy to each person at the time where they are most likely to open based on the historical data that you have available. Busted Tees, which is one of our commerce clients, implemented this feature, which is literally just a checkbox once you have the requisite historical data, and saw overnight an 8% revenue improvement in the conversions that they saw off of their email marketing. Besides this personalized send time, downflows versus historical or traditional unsubscribed pages have also resulted in a 12% plus improvement in unsubscribe rates for our clients. This is an example from LearnVest where instead of just giving the user the option to say, no, I don't want to receive email anymore, they allow them to get very granular about cherry picking precisely when they want to receive email. One of our commerce clients, Open Sky, leveraged the opt-down page to, again, capture 12% improvement in unsubscribe rate, which ultimately correlated to hundreds of thousands of dollars in recaptured annual revenue from email addresses they would have lost and not been able to market to. One thing to be important though is when you see decline in engagement, so let's for a second talk about open rate as an engagement method, is to break it down by different cohorts of user to look at how that attrition is happening over time. So in this particular example, where again, each one of these colored line represents a cohort of people based on when they joined. And then what we're looking at is what was the average open rate of that cohort and how does it change from their first 30 days up through the 6-month mark. And what you see is this steadily declines over time. This is a standard situation we see when we onboard new clients and what we look to plug very, very quickly. And we do this by giving people the tools to very seamlessly target older cohorts of users with more compelling content or more compelling subject lines that are more likely to keep them engaged. You very much need to message disengaged users very, very differently than people who are new to the brand if you're going to truly combat message fatigue efficiently. So the other thing to think about with retention is you want to understand how different devices or site experiences impact average order value and customer lifetime value. So on the right rail here, we think about, well, let's look for a sample brand. The average email addresses were $24. The average purchaser in general is $147. But the iPad purchaser, or someone who comes into the iPad device or the app, is worth $207 versus the iPhone user is only worth $163. So again, understanding what those dynamics are. Again, Sailthru has the tools where not only can you look at what's happening with the user based on their acquisition source, you can also look at user behavior based on specific devices. So what is the revenue propensity for someone who browses with an iPad versus someone who browses with an Android? Other things to think about. How does live chat functionality impact your site conversion in terms of when someone has a live chat, are they more likely to ultimately buy in that same session? And also, how does it impact average order value? One of our clients, Little Black Bag, has a neat methodology they use called opening AOV and closing AOV, where they look at what did someone come in and look to buy immediately, and then what was the upsell they were able to drive through video, through live chat, so on and so forth when the person ultimately checked out. So relatedly, think about videos or content curation you're doing, and do they positively impact transaction value, or do they actually detract from the customer experience? All of these things, so did the user have live chat? Has the user seen videos? Are variables that you could store on a user and pass into Sailthru so that we could help you do analysis to understand the revenue differential between people who had the live chat versus people who did not, and further, how that might change from an iPad to an iPhone and so on and so forth. So why is the iPhone, iPad stuff important? It's important because once you've identified the valuable behaviors, you want to drive users toward delivering more of those valuable behaviors. So this is an interesting email campaign from Seamless, and it's something they do pretty frequently. Well, they'll offer discounts, but they're specific to app orders. Now, if I were a betting woman, I'm willing to bet there's one of two reasons why they do this. One is probably, in the most likely case, because average order value is likely higher on an app than it is on desktop. So they're trying to drive people to go into the app so that they, again, even with a discount, have that float on the stronger top line number. Or the second is that when people use the app in a really convenient way, they're more likely to come back that much sooner because they saw how much easier it was. So again, think about what those dynamics are and drive people toward completing those valuable behaviors. So with retention push, what else works beyond kind of these higher level business attributes? Well, obviously incentives are always going to work, but as a reminder, you want to be as strategic about these as possible. You don't want to erode customer willingness to pay, and you always want to protect your bottom line. The second thing is that with or without discounts, urgency always helps to push product. So if someone looks at an item, you might send them a message that says, hey, there's only 5 of these left. If you want it, you better get in on it now because it's going fast. Holidays are a great time to see examples of this where people give you the only 28 hours left to ensure holiday delivery time, so on and so forth. Inventory updates are really powerful for re-engaging older cohorts of customers. Going back to the Savored example that I showed, if we think about the Denver example where they saw far fewer restaurants, that's an audience of users who would benefit from us reaching back out to saying, hey, we've added new restaurants this much more, we're adding them this much more frequently. This is an example from WARBY PARKER where they've gone back and introduced a whole new collection, and they're using their marketing very strategically to go out and introduce that inventory. WARBY PARKER is an interesting company to look at because they actually don't do much by way of email marketing, but they do rely heavily on these inventory updates. Winbacks are almost often one of the lowest hanging fruit that you can pursue. What winbacks do is they look at people who previously purchased from you or had some kind of deep engagement. So maybe they were a Facebook user who was on the site every day, but haven't done so recently. So maybe I was super active on Facebook for a while and I haven't logged in 90 days. For wine.com, I had bought from them in the past, but haven't bought recently. So again, I'm getting one of these classic we miss you type emails with some type of incentive. One thing to think about with the winbacks is what constitutes proper experiment design. It could be that I'm offering a 20% discount that gets me to come back to the site, but it could also just be the we miss you messaging. So a lot of times what we recommend to clients to, again, really protect that willingness to pay is to, do a split test where half of the audience gets, or actually the correct way to do it would be a three-thirds test, where the first third gets nothing, the second third gets an email of just we miss you, and the third gets a we miss you with an offer to see how many people you can recapture from each of those different buckets. Just something to think about as you go through this. You never want to offer the discount too quickly. Along those lines, when we think about activation series, what we'll often tell people is, contrary to the Rent the Runway example, give the customer 7, 14, 21 days to buy on their own, and only if they have not purchased at that time should you put the discount in front of them. So something to keep in mind as you develop your activation techniques. Drip campaigns can also be a powerful tool, especially for demonstrating social proof. So a lot of sites are increasingly relying on social login, so connect with Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, et cetera, to register. They do this for myriad reasons, primarily around kind of getting data around likes, that kind of stuff, but also for having access into your connections so that they can then go and kind of say to you, well, you're new to our brand, but these are your 15 friends who like our brand on Facebook, et cetera, et cetera. It also enables you to do email campaigns based on stuff that people in your network are doing, or if they start following you, as in the core example, so on and so forth. OpenSky, who, as I mentioned before, is a Sailthru commerce client, they have a unique model of curated commerce where their customers can pick various celebrities to follow their product curations and get email alerts when new products come out. So if I'm following Mario Batali, when he recommends a new product, I automatically, through Sailthru's platform, get an email about that new product that's available. Going into cart abandonment. So cart abandonment is pretty straightforward. This is something that on the Sailthru side is pretty easy to set up with our purchase API configuration. And again, it's a really low-hanging fruit in terms of a win. The average Sailthru client sees a 7% lift from cart abandonment pretty immediately, but some clients, for instance, jewelry retailer Alex Anani, saw a 73% improvement in cart abandonment in revenue from their cart abandonment series that they rolled out. So this is something that you're not leveraging. It's really important to think about. We also really encourage our clients to think about abandonment series versus a single email, again, with the idea of protecting willingness to pay. So the first one just says, hey, you know, our inventory moves pretty quickly. If you want this, you should get on it now. The second one, then, if the person still hasn't purchased, might go in and offers an incentive. Those tend to perform really well. What often performs even better than cart abandonment is browse abandonment. So a lot of times if someone looks at a product 4 times, the purchase intent may even be higher than if they actually put it in their cart. So one thing you can do is say, well, maybe if someone's looked at something 3 times or if they've searched for something, you can send these browse abandonment type tactics. And this is an example of something that I received from Amazon just by looking for K-cups. They've kind of gone and remarketed to me because that did not net out in a transaction. So thinking about retention, Sailthru has a couple of tools that allow you to build these retention emails in an automated way and so that you can set it and forget it. So the first is using our query builder tool, which you see here. I like to call it SQL for the layman, where you can kind of go in and set up dynamic lists that update, again, dynamically over time and deploy emails to them in an automated fashion. So for this one, I'm creating a smart list where I'm looking to deploy an email. Let's say that I want to do a typical RFM or recency, frequency, monetary value segmentation. So I'm looking at people who've bought at least 2 things. They haven't bought in the last 90 days, so this is a win-back email, and they've spent at least $100 to date, so I know how much they're worth. I know that this is a list that I'm going to have over time, and I can set an email to go out every morning to all of the new people who fall into this bucket for the first time, offering them some kind of win-back incentive. Our data feeds help you automate what that content might be. So again, you can go in and say, well, I want to showcase evergreen content. So again, it doesn't have to be new inventory or new stories. It could be stuff that's older, but that was really popular, so on and so forth, so that there's very little campaign build work involved on your end. You literally can go in, automatically hook up your product feed or content feed. We know what we know what we need to know about the user from the user profile, and we can go through and do that matching exercise accordingly. And the best part yet is that our Smart Strategies tool enables you to do all of this without any code. So this is a user-friendly graphical interface that lets you kind of go in and set up trigger emails to various smart lists that you set up over time to make those retention efforts that much more automated. So one quick thing that I always like to say, as I mentioned before, the typical RFM segmentation, at Sailthru we believe a lot more in what we call the BUS segmentation. So instead of recency, frequency, monetary value, we focus on behavioral, usage, and situational, where the RFM really only falls into the usage. Behavioral is more about what are they interested in, what do they look at. Situational is more about what the supply and demand thing, what device were they on, et cetera, et cetera. RFM kind of says, well, 80% of your revenue comes from 20% of your customers, which is great, but Sailthru seeks to answer the question of which attributes to those powerful 20% share and how can we drive more of those behaviors. So quickly just want to go through referrals and revenue with a few short slides, and then we'll turn it over into Q&A. So with referrals, the first thing is, referrals, again, pertains to driving a viral coefficient for your business. So a lot of people in the development of Facebook, Twitter, StumbleUpon, et cetera, have just placed sharing icons everywhere. This can be helpful, but it's not always helpful because a lot of times it's not content people are looking to share, and it's actually just a distraction or it steals real estate from another valuable call to action. So the first thing is that you want to understand what type of content is most likely to be shared and where it's most likely to be shared. If it's professional setting, maybe it's more LinkedIn. If it's commerce, maybe it's more Facebook, et cetera, et cetera. This is a company called AddThis that has a free product that makes it pretty easy to jump in and see what is the overarching viral coefficient of the content that you're sharing. It's important to remember that viral is actually not a strategy. You can't guarantee that a video goes viral. If that were the case, we'd have a lot of businesses out there that are substantially more successful than they are. But you should focus on sharing mechanics. So sharing mechanics are these like buttons, and again, making sure that people actually use them. They're also another Sailthru example, focusing on making it easy to share. So I've had a transaction, and now I want to, again, they're telling me, tell friends how smart you are with these savings, share it to Facebook and Twitter. They know I'm not going to share a dining deal on LinkedIn, so that's not present here, et cetera, et cetera. Incentives will always work well, but make sure when you're dealing with incentives, you focus on conversions versus volume. What I mean by that is don't reward people just to send you email addresses because you don't know if those email addresses will convert. If you look at someone like a guilt group, they'll say, well, you get a credit when you refer a friend and they actually go on to buy something. That's increasingly more common. This is a nice example from Dropbox around when you get a friend to install Dropbox, you both get a little something for free. So we've talked a lot about driving incremental revenue through all of these slides. There's a couple additional things I just want to highlight quickly that are above and beyond the scope of what we've discussed at this time. The first is, in general, thinking about optimizing emails based on real dollars rather than just opens or clicks. So this is a screen grab of sample metrics that we give in Sailthru on any given campaign. We have the standard stuff that people think on around opens or renders and click rate, but we also have default metrics that are focused on page views and revenue, depending on what type of business you are. So you can actually see, without gluing together data from a multitude of different data sources, how much revenue is coming from any given email. When you click into any given campaign, you can go a level further and understand precisely what in your template is driving that revenue. So this can help you understand, well, are you better off having 8 products in a template or 15? Giving another example from Sailthru, we used Sailthru at that point when I was still on the team there to test the number of restaurants that we featured any particular template. By doing that, we were able to move from having 4 restaurants in a template to 15, which ultimately increased revenue per 1,000 emails by over 300%. Now, we also tested going to 20 offers, 25. We saw diminishing returns at that point, but again, it was easy to get these insights out of tools like the revenue click map here. Other tools that kind of sit in the Sailthru product suite that can help you out here. One is the personalized product slider. This has proved to augment your merchandising and improve average order value. We know that a lot of times there can be a contentious battle between the merchandising team and the marketing team in terms of what the marketing team wants to showcase and what the merchandising team wants to showcase. The slider is a great way to cherry pick certain pages, for instance, the cart page, where you can, again, drive product recommendations to improve average order value or that closing AOV that I mentioned before. One other thing I'll just note on personalization in general, again, is by switching to a personalization model, it allows you to go that much deeper into your catalog. It allows you to showcase products with much more scale that you may not have been focused on showcasing in the past because you're putting in front of the users that are most likely to want to see them. The other thing is to focus on pushing incremental dollars at every point in the transaction. So this is a screenshot off of countryoutfitter.com where I'm $13.05 away from free shipping. They're going to try to squeeze that $13 out of me because, again, it will bring up the average order value. Another point on that front is to think about setting a floor. If you set a floor such as you get $20 off of orders of $150 or more, you're likely to see that average order value be well above $150. So, again, a really helpful tactic. So that's what I wanted to review today. The thought I want to leave you guys with, again, to tie it all together, is that it's always more valuable to retain an existing customer than to acquire a new one. So sure, it's important to know how to be able to calculate those acquisition costs, but to really squeeze every acquisition nickel until it screams, so to speak, you want to make sure that you're converting all of those people on the back end. And hopefully the tactics that we've outlined here today can really help you with putting your best foot forward to, again, make the most of your marketing mix that you have out there. With that, we're going to open up to questions. Just give us 1 second while we open up the queue here. Okay, so first question we have is around social media. So the question pertains to, well, we talked a little bit about building this 360-degree profile of the user. We talked a little bit about kind of sharing mechanics. How can we potentially leverage that data that exists in social channels back into our marketing campaigns? So there's a number of ways we can do this. I'll speak to a little bit how we do it from the Sailthru side. So at Sailthru, we've partnered with a company called Gigia, and what Gigia is it's basically the platform that powers a lot of those sign-ins that you see with login with Facebook, login with Twitter, et cetera, to actually be able to tie the email address we have for any brand's particular end user back to their Facebook profile. So in addition to having interest that the client is passing us, or data the client is passing us around what the person has purchased, when they joined, where they signed up from, et cetera, we augment that profile with all of their Facebook profile data as well. So we could go in and the brand could then say, well, I want to know if a Facebook fan is more valuable to us than someone who's not. And again, that Gigia information is passed to us in the form of custom variables, and through the query builder tool that we highlighted quickly, the client could go in and say, I want to look at lifetime revenue for someone who's a Facebook fan versus not, or someone who's a Facebook fan who, likes golf versus someone who likes tennis, so on and so forth. So that's kind of one straightforward way to go ahead and do that. Next question is kind of further on, so this question is on dealing with anonymous traffic. So inevitably, we think about when we look at a particular website, there's some websites have an easier time of capturing email addresses than others. Many let people browse anonymously or as a guest and then ultimately incentivize to sign up at a later point in time. The question is, how are we able to kind of pass along that historical data on an anonymous user into a user profile after the fact? The answer is actually the advent of mobile technology has really helped with this. This can be a very challenging exercise on the desktop situation where if it's within a same session and someone signs up, we're able to capture a certain amount of data that might be happening. If it happened a year ago, obviously that's lost to a certain degree. However, with apps, because every phone has a UDID or a unique identifier attached to it, let's say that someone is browsing within an app without having signed up, looks at 50 different products, and then ultimately decides to sign up. Because that's a unique identifier on that particular device, we're able to capture all of that historical data and then bake it into the user profile moving forward. So the app economy is doing really great things for kind of painting a seamless evolution of the user profile over time. I think that's it from questions. I'll give it one more minute. If anyone else has anything they wanted to post, you can just send to host. All right, well, we're going to wind down for today. We'll circulate the slides at some point, later today or later this week. But again, thank you so much for making the time to join us after the long weekend, and we hope this was a helpful exercise. Take care.